The courtroom was a tense, electric space. The air seemed thick with anticipation as the gavel came down, signaling the start of the trial. It was a high-profile case, one that had captured the attention of the nation. A black police officer, Kiera Thompson, stood tall, her expression unreadable, as she faced off against a judge whose reputation for playing fast and loose with the law was well known. Today, however, Kiera was about to reveal a truth that would shake the very foundation of the judicial system. The case, the charges, and the entire trial had been a farce from the start, but no one knew it better than Kiera. It all began when Officer Kiera Thompson had been called to testify in a racial profiling case. She had witnessed the arrest of an innocent man, something that, as a black woman in law enforcement, felt like a slap to the face. The prosecutor had twisted her testimony to fit a narrative that painted the entire police force as racists. The public was in an uproar, and Kiera was caught in the crossfire. But the more she thought about it, the more something didn't sit right. The case was wrong on every level. The evidence didn't add up, and the story that had been spun by the prosecution was full of holes. Worse, it became clear to Kiera that this case wasn't about justice, it was about manipulation. The judge, Charles Fenton, had presided over the case for weeks, publicly humiliating her at every turn. His smug demeanor was a constant reminder of the power he wielded. But what no one knew was that Judge Fenton wasn't just a corrupt official with a bias against her. He was the very reason this case had been engineered in the first place. He had been part of a larger scheme to manipulate the court system to silence victims who were fighting for justice. Kiera's mind raced as she stood in the witness box, the weight of her revelation pressing heavily on her. Every word she had spoken had been a calculated move, each one designed to bring the truth to light. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. The case was nearing its conclusion, and Kiera could feel the walls closing in. The jury had already started to form their opinions, and the public sentiment had been swayed by the prosecutor's inflammatory statements. Kiera was about to lose everything: her career, her reputation, and her freedom until she made a choice. As Judge Fenton raised his gavel to close the case, Kiera stood up straight. Her heart pounded in her chest. With a steady hand, she reached for the envelope she had hidden beneath her jacket and slammed it down onto the table. The courtroom fell silent as she pulled out a badge, a federal investigator's badge. The gasps from the crowd echoed through the room. Kiera's voice cut through the silence, sharp and unwavering. "Your Honor, you're under arrest." Judge Fenton's face drained of color. His eyes flickered with disbelief as the room erupted in chaos. But Kiera wasn't done. She wasn't just an officer of the law. She was a federal investigator, one who had spent months gathering evidence against Fenton and his corrupt network. This trial was never meant to be about racial profiling. It was a diversion, a way to cover up something much larger. And now Kiera was here to take it down. As Kiera moved to make the arrest, everything seemed to unfold in slow motion. The prosecutor, who had relentlessly attacked Kiera on the stand, now stood frozen, his face a mixture of shock and fear. The other officers in the room hesitated, unsure of what to do next. But before Kiera could fully make her move, a loud crash interrupted the moment. The doors to the courtroom burst open, and in walked a familiar figure, her long-lost ally, Detective Marcus Lee. Marcus had been working on a separate investigation that Kiera hadn't even known about. He had been digging into the same corruption, uncovering evidence that tied Fenton to a web of illegal activity, including everything from bribery to murder. The two had unknowingly been working towards the same goal, but it wasn't until now that their paths had finally crossed. With a glance from Marcus, Kiera understood everything. The network of corruption went deeper than either of them had imagined. And it wasn't just Judge Fenton who was at the center of it all. It was a vast, well-organized group that had been operating for years. As Marcus approached the judge, the crowd watched in stunned silence, waiting for what would happen next. Kiera's heart raced, the suspense unbearable. But just as the arrest was about to be made, something unexpected happened. The lights in the courtroom flickered, and the prosecutor, who had once been Kiera's greatest adversary, suddenly collapsed. He was rushed to the hospital, but no one could explain why. Was it just a coincidence? Or had the conspiracy finally come to a head? Was the prosecutor involved in something bigger than anyone had realized? The tension was unbearable, and Kiera could feel the weight of the truth pressing down on her. They had to move fast. The evidence she had was damning, but the longer they waited, the more chance the conspirators had to cover their tracks. Just as Kiera and Marcus were about to make the final move to bring Fenton down, another shockwave hit. A figure in the back of the courtroom stood, stepping into the spotlight, a key witness who had been on the prosecution's side all along. And then, she changed her story. The witness, who had once sworn that she had seen Kiera involved in a cover-up, now stood and told the court that she had been pressured into lying. The room went silent once more as the witness revealed the truth that she had been threatened, manipulated, and paid off to say what she had said. Kiera's blood ran cold. The twist was almost too much to comprehend. Was this the opening they had been waiting for? Or was it another piece of the puzzle that would only make things more complicated? Before Kiera could even react, Fenton made a desperate move. He lunged towards a hidden drawer in his desk and pulled out a gun. The courtroom erupted in chaos as officers scrambled to control the situation. The stakes were higher than ever. It was no longer just about exposing one corrupt judge, it was about taking down a system that had allowed this kind of injustice to thrive. And now, with the key players exposed, Kiera and Marcus had no choice but to take matters into their own hands. But just as Kiera reached for her handcuffs, the courtroom doors slammed shut with a resounding crash. The last thing Kiera saw before the lights went out was the terrified look in Marcus's eyes as the dark figure in the doorway raised a gun. The world seemed to stand still as Kiera Thompson stared at the dark figure in the doorway. The metallic click of a gun's safety being released echoed louder than any shout. Marcus Lee's eyes locked onto the figure, his hand instinctively reaching for his own weapon. Every muscle in Kiera's body screamed at her to react, but her mind was far ahead, processing everything in an instant. The figure stepped forward, revealing their identity. A man dressed in a long, black trench coat. Kiera's heart dropped as she recognized him, Detective Franklin Moore, a man she had trusted when they were both younger officers. But now, Moore had aligned himself with the system of corruption that had cost so many their freedom, their dignity, and their lives. "You don't have to do this, Kiera," Moore said coldly, his hand gripping the gun tightly. His eyes flickered briefly to the judge, who had backed away to the far corner of the room. "It's over." Kiera's pulse raced. She had known that taking down the judicial corruption would be dangerous. But this? She wasn't ready for this level of betrayal. "Franklin," Kiera said, her voice steady, but with a warning edge. "You've been working for them all along, haven't you?" Moore's expression didn't change. "You think you can fight this system? You think you can bring it all down with your little badge and your righteous anger? You're just one person, Kiera. Just one person in a long line of people who tried and failed." "I'm not just one person," Kiera snapped. "I'm the person who will bring this down. I'm not leaving here without justice." The tension in the air was thick, each second drawn out like an eternity. Kiera could feel her resolve hardening. This wasn't just about one corrupt judge anymore. It was about the entire broken system she had devoted her life to upholding. She had seen enough, learned enough, and now she knew too much to let it all slip away. The truth was a weapon she would wield, no matter the cost. The gun shook slightly in Moore's hand as his grip tightened. He had been used to power, to being part of the system that controlled everything, but seeing Kiera stand her ground had made him uncertain. His eyes darted between her and the judge, now cornered and trying to hide behind a desk. "I don't have to do anything," Moore said, a sneer tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I'm just the messenger. The people you're up against, they won't stop at anything, and neither will I." "You're wrong," Kiera said, stepping forward, her heart pounding in her chest. "They've already lost. This trial, this whole charade, it's over. You can't run anymore." A part of Kiera's mind was still racing, calculating. If she could just get closer, disarm him, take control of the situation. But Marcus was already moving, his steady hands outstretched. With a single swift motion, he knocked the gun from Moore's grip, sending it skidding across the floor. The room fell into chaos as Moore lunged at Marcus, the two men struggling against the mounting tension. Kiera stood frozen for a moment, watching, her breath caught in her throat. Then, with every ounce of strength she had left, she rushed forward, tackling Moore to the ground. She held him down, pinning him with the kind of determination that had carried her through every challenge in her career. "Get the handcuffs!" Kiera shouted. Marcus, ever the professional, quickly moved to restrain Moore, securing his hands behind his back. "We're done here," Kiera said, standing up, her voice unwavering. The aftermath of the courtroom was a blur. Officers flooded in, securing the scene, taking Moore into custody, and processing the evidence. Kiera didn't feel the rush of victory. She felt the weight of the years spent in this broken system, the weight of every face she had seen unjustly punished, the families torn apart by a corrupt system. Today, it wasn't just one corrupt judge who had been exposed. It was the beginning of something much larger, something far more dangerous to the status quo. She moved to the judge's desk, her hand hovering over the pile of documents. The evidence she had meticulously gathered was now in the open. What had been carefully hidden was now laid bare. Judge Fenton's role in the corruption, the illegal deals, the cover-ups, the manipulated cases was all there. The web of deceit was unraveling. But there was more. As the court officers began securing the remaining evidence, Kiera's mind kept racing. This was only the beginning. The system was still standing. The criminals who had worked behind the scenes, those who had orchestrated this entire operation, were still free. Her thoughts were interrupted when Marcus approached her, his face tense but resolute. "Kiera, there's something else you need to see," he said quietly. Kiera followed Marcus into a back room, where a pile of sealed envelopes sat on the table. The contents were files newly discovered, freshly delivered. Her eyes widened as she flipped through the papers. There were names, dates, and connections to powerful figures that Kiera hadn't expected. There was one name that stood out. Franklin Moore had been working for someone even more influential, someone who had been pulling the strings all along. The realization hit Kiera like a punch to the gut. The fight for justice had just become far more dangerous. The names on these files weren't just criminals, they were the ones who controlled the power, the ones who had manipulated the entire system from the inside out. And now they knew she had exposed them. They wouldn't stop, not until every trace of their wrongdoing had been buried. But Kiera wasn't backing down. Not now. Not when she had come so far. She had been silent for too long, a witness to the systemic failures and racial injustices that had plagued her community. And now she was no longer a passive observer. She was the catalyst for change. She closed the file, locking eyes with Marcus. "We're going after them. All of them." Marcus nodded. "I'm with you. All the way." The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Investigations were launched, and the entire system began to shift. Every corner of the judicial system that Kiera had once trusted was exposed for its flaws. What had been swept under the rug for so long was now being brought into the light. But it wasn't easy. There were roadblocks at every turn. Pressure from those in power to drop the case, threats against Kiera's life, and subtle attempts to discredit her. She couldn't fight the fight alone. She had to rely on her allies, people she had once thought of as colleagues, to help dismantle the corruption from within. One by one, the figures involved in the conspiracy were arrested, and the case against them grew stronger. Judge Fenton was just the first. As the web continued to unravel, Kiera knew that true justice was still a long way off. But for the first time in her life, she felt like the truth was finally being heard. For every person who had suffered in silence, for every victim whose voice had been silenced, this was their moment. This was the beginning of a change that would reverberate for generations. As the final pieces of the puzzle fell into place, Kiera stood in front of a crowd, her voice steady but filled with conviction. "This isn't over. But today we've taken the first step toward restoring the justice that has been denied for far too long. We've exposed a system that has worked against us. And now we'll build a new one, a system that works for us." The crowd erupted in applause, the tension that had gripped the courtroom now dissipating into hope. Kiera stepped off the stage, her heart still heavy, but her resolve unshaken. She had done what so many had tried and failed to do. She had taken down the corrupt system that had perpetuated prejudice for years. And she would continue the fight because the truth, no matter how dangerous, was the most powerful weapon she had. As the camera zoomed out on Kiera, standing strong in front of the podium, the voiceover echoed one last time. True justice is not something you wait for, it's something you fight for. And Kiera Thompson has shown us all what it takes to bring down the system of prejudice and corruption. Subscribe to stay updated on the fight for justice, because the battle is far from over.